continue to work on the technical issues with those individual members to get them elevated up to the panelist level.
Thank you, Alex. And thank you, everyone. We greatly appreciate your patience. And welcome to the September 29th joint meeting of the MPO Policy Board for DCHC and Campo. We've got a full agenda, and we appreciate everyone being on the call today. I see 107 participants, which just speaks to the interest of our agenda as well as your interest in transportation issues. Let me just mention at the outset that this is a very important meeting, and we are very interested in your comments and your participation, and we want to be listening carefully, and we want to have the utmost respect for both of our colleagues and our staff and all of our citizens who are here to express their views. Because we want to hear from so many people and we're limited to just a 2-hour meeting, we want to run a very tight meeting so we can make sure we hear from everyone. They are trying to elevate my co-chair, Wendy Jacobs, the chair of DCHC, to a panelist position so she can participate with me running this meeting. But to my knowledge right now, she has not been elevated, and they're working on that technical problem as well. But just in terms of time, we're going to go ahead and start with the meeting. Wendy will join us and have some comments when she does join us. But in the interim, let's start with the roll call. Alex?
Thank you, sir. So we will call out the name of the MPO member agency. If you would, please, if you are the TAC member, take yourself off of mute, say your name to indicate your presence, or if you are the alternate member. Starting with the city of Creedmoor. Do not see Nina on the list. City of Raleigh. Franklin County. Granville County.
Russ May here.
Thank you, sir. Harnett County. Johnston County.
Alex, I'm sorry. This is Lou Weatherspoon, Harnett County. I'm here.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. And of course, Mr. Hutchinson, have you here for Wake County. Go Triangle.
Will Allen here.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any of our DOT board members with us today?
Valerie.
Valerie,
Melvin.
thank you very much.
Melvin Mitchell.
Mitchell, thank you, sir. Town of Anger.
Mayor Bob Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. Town of Apex.
Mayor Jacques Gilbert here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Town of Archer Lodge. Town of Bunn. Town of Cary. Town of Clayton. Town of Franklinton. Town of Fuquay-Varina. Town of Garner. Town of Holly Springs. Town of Knightdale. Town of Morrisville.
Mayor TJ Colley, present.
Thank you, Mayor. Town of Rollsville. Town of Wake Forest, and I believe Mayor Jones is on the attendee list. We'll get her elevated up to a panelist in just a minute. Town of Wendell.
Good morning. This is Virginia Gray.
Good morning. Town of Youngsville.
Commissioner Scott Breen.
Town of Zebulon. And now moving on to the Durham-Chapel Hill-Carrboro MPO. City of Durham.
Charlie Reese.
Thank you, sir.
I believe Javier Caballero is also on the call.
Excellent. Chatham County.
Karen Howard, present.
Thank you. Durham County, Wendy is.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh,
thank
excellent.
you.
Thank you. Sorry
yes,
about that.
Wendy Jacobs here. Thank you.
Excellent. Orange County.
Jamesetta Bedford's here.
Excellent. Go Triangle.
Michael Parker is here.
Thank you. And do we have any other board members, DOT board members for the DCHC area? Mike Fox, okay.
Lisa Mathis is on, but she said she cannot, she can't get on the video. She's only listening in right now.
Excellent, thank you. We'll see if we can get that working in just a second. Town of Carrboro.
Damon Siles here.
Thank you, sir. Town of Chapel Hill.
Mayor Pam Heminger here.
Thank you, Mayor. And Town of Hillsborough.
Mark Bell is here, alternate.
Excellent. Thank you. And Mr. Chair, that concludes our roll call.
I believe Jessica Day from Nightdale is trying to say she's here, but she's having connection issues.
Okay.
Thank you.
And this is Mary Ann Baldwin. I could not unmute, so I could not participate in roll call, but I am present and I've been elevated to a panelist.
Thank you, Mayor. Have you marked present? Thank you.
And this is Jen Weaver, Mayor of Hillsborough. I also momentarily lost my ability to unmute, but it has returned, and I am present for the town of Hillsborough.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, and we've got is there anyone else who needs to be elevated to the panelist status who currently is not? Okay, if you just let us know by texting me or putting something in the chat, we'll get you elevated to a panelist. And at this point, my understanding is the videos are not functioning right now, and I'm sure staff is working on that. But let me turn it over to my co-chair, Wendy Jacobs. Welcome, Wendy, and thank you.
Well, thank you, Sig, and it's great to be together, tech challenges and all. So thank you, everyone, for your patience. We're going to move quickly on to the public comments since we have a very tight agenda today. We ask that everybody please state your name and your organization. We really have to limit this to the maximum of 2 minutes, but we're also asking folks, if you have heard someone say things that have already been said, in the interest of time, please edit yourself and just, you can say that you agree with what has been previously said. And would be great if folks could even try to do 1 minute rather than 2 minutes, looking at the numbers who were signed up and our late start due to tech issues. So we will get started with the public comments. Thank you. Kim Hunter.
I apologize to our two chairs. We're having technical difficulties getting our attendees unmuted also. Kim, can you?
Yes, I just was unmuted. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
We hear
Great.
you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Kim Hunter. I'm a senior attorney with the Southern Environmental Law Center. I've worked on transportation issues in this region for over a decade and represent a number of community environmental groups. And really, I'm here today to make the point that this is really a turning point, I think a really important point in transportation planning. The climate crisis is getting ever more pressing. We know that transportation is the leading cause of climate change now across the United States and set to become the leading cause in North Carolina. A lot of the organizations in these two MPOs have very significant and laudable climate goals, which we really want to see met, but which we cannot see met without a serious focus on doing things different in the transportation planning arena. For too long, we've just followed the same old ways of doing things and tinkered with them here and there, maybe a little more bike ped, a little more transit, but we really need to fundamentally rethink our goals. As having worked in this arena for so long, the one thing that has been really clear to me is that these ideas, these ambitions have to come from the local level. The state routinely says that it will do and it will mirror what the localities want. And so when you're considering your long-term transportation plans, we are urging you to think of the goals that broadly on climate, on safety, on social equity, and to really think in a visionary way, going out forward to the next decade, to the one after that. What can we do? How do we want our future to be? Don't be constrained by the thinking of the past, and set those goals so that the state can follow and the state can help you to get there. And I'll thank you for the appreciate to comment today.
Thank you, Kim. Harry Johnson.
Oh, good morning. Can everyone hear me? Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Thanks, y'all. You might hear my toddler son in the background, so enjoy that for my 2 minutes. But I would echo everything that Kim said. I'm a resident of Raleigh, near downtown. I work in downtown Durham. That is, once COVID will be over. I'm a former resident of Chapel Hill and Carrboro, and so I'm really excited that the two MPOs that represent our whole region are talking with each other at this level. I would add that right now the Triangle region is poised to see a dramatic increase in vehicle miles traveled, and even if we're trying to switch the source of fuel for our vehicles from fossil fuels to electric vehicles, which is a great thing, you're not going to be able to meet the goals that either a locality is setting, whether it's the city of Raleigh or Wake County or the state of North Carolina with Governor Cooper's goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions just by switching to electric vehicles. We have to reduce vehicle miles traveled per capita. And right now, the Triangle region is one of the highest regions in the country in terms of EMT per capita. So any strategy or project or funding that this organization, along with Durham-Chapel Hill-Carrboro MPO, can utilize to achieve those goals, put it all on the table, and let's do what we can to ensure that we leave George, currently rolling around on the floor here, a great region to live, work, and play. So thanks, y'all, and I'll yield the rest of my time.
Thank you so much. Mary Sell.
Good morning. Mary Sell with Oaks and Spokes. Can everybody hear me? Good morning. Can y'all hear me? I'm sorry. Okay. So I work with Oaks and Spokes. We're a local advocacy organization committed to advancing transportation options and transportation equity in Raleigh. We're speaking today in favor of reassessing our past practices and acknowledging the importance of aligning our transportation projects with stated community goals on equity and climate, areas where we're currently falling short. Widening our roadways and consistently adding vehicle capacity is having a detrimental impact on our community and is leading to increased emissions and increased disparity. As a community, if we're serious about climate change, we must find a better way to grow than our current model. A group of community members are speaking today after the DC HCMPO met and started to reassess their transportation policies and acknowledge that their project prioritization did not help advance and in fact was diminishing their work to meet climate and equity goals. Their community called for projects to lead to a 25% reduction in BMT, and we would encourage CAMPO to adopt a similar model to better quantify impacts from our transportation policies. We need more robust metrics that better capture improvements on safety, emissions, and community-wide transportation access. It's time for a refresh in our transportation strategies and a more resilient growth model for our community. It's critical we take bold action now to reinvest in a more sustainable and equitable future. We've got to look at better policies and better transportation projects. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Terry Lansdale.
Hello, this is Terry Lansdale, Director of Bike Walk North Carolina, the state's only statewide bicycle pedestrian advocacy group. I want to begin by saying that you're not alone in this effort. We appreciate the work that's being done here and across the state to provide a new vision for a comprehensive planning for the state. I want to reinforce Kim Hunter's statements that these are the foundation blocks for what the state does in fiscal responsibility, prioritization, and investments in communities across the state. We need to support every effort to prepare and adopt plans, a variety of plans, transportation plans included, that reflect the needs, wants, and desires of local communities who are working on them. Building a sustainable transportation network is critical to economic development, equity issues, and environmental issues across the state. I'll end my time here today by stating that over the policies of the past that have yielded a 10 million person population for North Carolina with over 7 million vehicles registered in North Carolina, a replacement and infrastructure improvement for sustainable transportation cannot only include a vehicle for vehicle replacement. We have to invest in more sustainable, active transportation, and we hope that this plan and others across the state will reflect that and be an impact to state policy in the future. Thank you, and I yield my time back.
Thank you very much. Nathan Spencer.
Thank you very much. My name is Nathan Spencer. I'm Executive Director with Wake Up Wake County. Wake Up's mission is to promote good growth, planning, and sustainable, healthy communities throughout through education, advocacy, and civic engagement, advancing a higher quality of life for all. I'm speaking with you today because we have an opportunity. As we look towards 2050, we need to be planning for a more climate-friendly region. We need to reduce emissions, not just through electric vehicles, but with frequent and regional transit, safe streets that work for everyone, regardless of how you choose to move about the region. Projects like Triangle Bikeway and the safe routes to schools are exactly on point and where our region needs to be going. We need to recognize the impact of climate change that climate change is having on our communities already, and plan for a region that doesn't rely on vehicles, but relies more on public transit, smarter land use, and economic opportunity for all of our residents. The staff will plan based on the interests of these two bodies that are meeting today. Wake Up is standing with our partners this morning, asking for your support for a plan that contributes more for what we know this region needs to look like in the future, and reduce the greenhouse gases, vehicle miles traveled, and the harmful car-dependent projects that we're seeing in the past. We understand that this is a long road and this won't change overnight, but today is the day that we can start making significant change and a way we can move about our region. We ask for your support and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. John Tallmadge. John, are you able to get in?
Sorry. Hi, this is John Tallmadge, Executive Director of Bike Durham. I want to start by thanking the members of the DCHC Executive Board for the decisions that they've made in recent meetings to set very bold goals for the 2050 MTP of zero carbon emissions by 2050, zero deaths and serious injuries on our roads, and zero racial disparity in access to our communities. And to tell the staff that they want a plan that shows them the difficult trade-offs that are going to be required to get there. This planning document is not only a list of projects that we can afford, but this is an opportunity to have that community discussion and the elected leader discussion about what is it going to take to achieve these priorities that we're setting for ourselves. I echo what has been said about the climate change, but I just also want to put a point on the historic and continued inequities in our transportation system by focusing on congestion relief and delay for people who are driving. You see that in the metrics, that in the efficiency analysis, in the tools that the staff has. Campo and DCHC, you have the best staff, MPO staff in the state, and they just need your direction that this is what they want to see. So I urge you at Campo to reconsider the decision to do the altogether alternative and to join DCHC in pushing your staff to bring back a more bold alternative for our future. Thank you.
you. Mary Jo Gallenbach.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Sure. I'm not sure. Can you guys, do you unmute me?
You are unmuted.
You're good.
Okay, great, thanks. Hello, my name is Mary Jo Gallenbach, and it's a privilege to be able to speak with you all directly. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I started my career as an active transportation advocate in 2015 when my twin sons showed no interest in earning a driver's license. They're now 21 and they still have not learned how to drive. And that rising generation, they are the oldest of the Zoomers. They're not alone. And so I started to analyze our system. And if my children are going to be outside of the car, that means they're going to be traveling as a multimodal. And as a concerned parent, I knew that we needed to shift because the infrastructure is very dedicated to the vehicle travel. I'm excited to announce that the City of Raleigh has appointed me to serve on BPAC. And this has given me an opportunity to listen to the public as well as see some of the planning that they are presenting. And one of the areas is the Capitol Boulevard North Corridor, which is an area where 20% of apparently our sale revenue is generated. So this is a very important corridor for Raleigh. And Capitol Boulevard is Route 1. And I saw the plans, and it's not conducive to encouraging people to walk, cycle, or scoot at all. What they've done is they've put a sidewalk and a bicycle lane between Capitol Boulevard and another vehicle lane. And this type of environment does not encourage people to be able to gain access by walking or cycling. And so if they don't feel comfortable, then they're going to resort back to the vehicle. And so I asked them, why is it that you're building more vehicle lanes at a time when in 2020 we've had this paradigm shift to virtual travel? And my children also expressed that it was effortless for them to transition into the virtual travel because that's what they've been doing when they were teenagers. They use the internet highway to make those emotional connections. They're able to be engaged just as we are right now. So for us to continue to go down the pathway of just dedicating our funding for vehicle infrastructure is not conducive to what the future entails and what the future rising generation wants. And so I ask, back to the Capitol Boulevard corridor, why are we building more vehicle lanes instead of dedicating more land to the active transportation infrastructure? And they said it's because it's NCDOT. And so this really goes to the heart of the issue, is the policies that are in place kind of keeps this cruise ship going in the same direction. And so I am pleading with you as a parent, as a resident, to analyze those policies, to loosen up funding so that we're investing in the active transportation infrastructure, which we know will benefit us as a whole, our health and well-being as an individual. So healthcare costs will go down. We will have closer to vision zero for injuries and deaths, and our environment will benefit from it. And this is the future, and I yield my time with this moment to say, please do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Dwight Otwell.
Good morning. It's an honor. Thank you for allowing us to come speak this morning. My name is Dwight Otwell. I am the current chair of the Raleigh Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission. And I echo everything that's been said here so far. And I will add that we've done some great work in my time volunteering with the city. My goal is to allow people to have safe and comfortable access to the necessities of life. This is the most financially productive, and I think builds the strongest communities, form of development that we can have. We've done a lot of work, and we've installed a whole bunch of bike facilities and upgraded a lot of pedestrian infrastructure in the city, and we still struggle to move the needle. As long as our policies and our procedures are intended to accommodate increasing VMT, we're fighting against the tide. So we can add as many bicycles and bike lanes as we want, but if we keep building our cities for cars, we're going to have auto-dependent cities. And I urge you guys to take bold action on this long-term plan and set a vision for our future that reduces reliance on automobiles. And I urge you to set a course for a stronger and more resilient communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jasmine, Washington.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Jasmine Washington, and I'm an associate at Southern Environmental Law Center and a resident of the Braxton Village neighborhood in Holly Springs. I was also born and raised in Bunn, where my parents and many other members of my family and friends still reside. I would like to echo the comments of my colleague, Kim Hunter, but also speak a little bit more personally. As a native of Franklin County and current resident of Holly Springs, I see firsthand the dependence that the Triangle's current transportation system has on cars. Campo must act now to break that dependence and develop a sustainable transportation plan for the Triangle that centers equity, safety, and multimodal options that serve everyone. Growing up in Bunn, there was and still is no public transit besides school buses and for the elderly. There are no buses or transports that connect community members to resources offered in nearby towns or cities. This means that for any family that can remotely afford it, you have to have a car in order to access basic resources and employment. Growing up, I would run errands with my mom that often included trips to the store for others or carrying family members to doctor's appointments because they didn't have a car or their car was in the shop or they couldn't drive. I'm currently in both Bunn and Holly Springs. If you don't live in the center of town, there are no sidewalks that connect you to town. This means that, like many other Triangle towns, subdivisions are built, in essence, on islands with no connection to the greater community outside the solitude of one's automobile. I currently live less than 1.5 miles from Holly Springs High School and Holly Grove Middle and Elementary Schools. There are also 3 new subdivisions down the road for me that are less than 2 miles from these schools. That I don't see children walk into school, partly because the sidewalks in our neighborhood don't connect and provide a viable means for children and families to walk. Sidewalks throughout town dead end in ditches hundreds of feet from one another. And to echo earlier comments of Mary Jo, because I see bikers being blown past on their way to Harris Lake or to Harris Teeter, because outside of our numerous beautiful parks, there are no bike lanes or greenways that connect the community. So these are just some small examples of the greater issues that exist in the Triangle's current transportation system. Without a car, living your day-to-day life here and accessing the community and town resources is impossible. Triangle communities need more meaningful options for transportation that don't depend on car ownership. The Triangle, particularly the communities on its outer edge, are growing dramatically, and we need to act immediately to ensure that growth is handled in a way that does not exacerbate greenhouse gas emissions. We have no choice but to set ambitious goals, and the long-range transportation plan is the perfect opportunity to set a vision that is different from the long-standing car-centered status quo. This staff has the expertise to develop a sustainable plan that centers equity, safety, and multimodal options that serve everyone, and I ask you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine. I'm going to ask everyone to please try to keep to the 2 minutes. Next is Tina Govan.
Yes. Hi, I live in Raleigh. I've been here for 30 years, and I echo everyone else's statements. Just to add a couple other comments, that the cost of highways and the cost of maintaining highways is something that's rarely examined. It's something that the federal government is now looking at, and they're doing a highway removal. So we really have to look at that when we weigh our options, is how much it's costing to expand highways or add lanes to highways. That is a choice that is in the wrong direction. And if you design cities for cars, you'll get that. You'll get cars. So we really need to start looking at the metrics, as John Tallmadge was saying, in terms of pedestrians and cyclists. So many cities are doing this around the world. They've changed character. They've become sustainable and green and more humane. And we can too. We got to get on the right track and on board with what the rest of the world is doing. So you're in a position to make choices that impact all of us. It's a matter of our survival. We can't keep talking about climate change without taking real action, walking the talk. So what we need more than anything is brave leadership, brave leaders who can move to shift our direction and not fall back on the comfortable status quo, the easy choice that's been made over and over again. So you must evaluate projects from the point of view of pedestrians and cyclists when you decide what you're going to fund. And we should also have better community engagement in the selection of projects that we push forward. Thank you.
Nick Neptune.
Good morning. Good morning, and thank you to our Campo board, our DCHC MPO board, and our respective staffs. I'd also like to thank all of my colleagues who've gone in advance of me and effectively, in quite eloquent terms, have already related what I'm here to relate and state. I'm here as the board chair and president of Oaks and Spokes, the local biking advocacy group based in Raleigh, but I also speak to you as a resident of Raleigh and the Triangle for over 15, 16 years, from Chapel Hill to again, our state capital. And, just to put it kind of quickly and briefly in another way through like some 10-second stories, just last night I was at dinner at a spot downtown Raleigh in Boylan Heights neighborhood, and I met a couple. I met an active, older adult couple who told me, Neptune, we moved to Glenwood South because of its walkability to everything. We are literally looking for neighborhoods that are more walkable. I was walking through the Village District the other day, ran past a young man, a college student, talking to his mom. He's like, Mom, I think I'm going to be okay without a car. I don't need a car. I can walk everywhere I need to go. I can bike everywhere I need to go. So again, just to echo, honestly, all the comments made here, this really is, it's today and it's the future. These investments that we're talking about, that we're seeking in our community, if we're serious about climate change, serious about equity, serious about expanding opportunity and access, then I think we've got to be very serious about leading, embracing this opportunity to lead in investing in more public transit, and improvements in our cycling and pedestrian infrastructure. So many thanks to all of you for your work. Deeply appreciate you. I know it's not easy, but please keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you. Heidi Perry.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. I am a resident of Carrboro. I've been a bicycle and pedestrian advocate for most of my adult life. At last month's DCHC MPO meeting, I was so proud of our elected officials asking the staff to come back with an alternative plan that didn't look like every other status quo plan. I personally know many of the staff members of both MPOs, and I know they are ready to embrace this change in thinking. For too many years, our state's funding mechanisms and scoring matrices have dictated what projects were even submitted for scoring. And at the end of each submission round, our communities have been disappointed time after time to find that there was no funding allotted to the projects they were most interested in. Projects that would allow and encourage people to walk or bike for short trips, or that would really improve transit. And yet, MPOs have continued to push forward massively expensive highway projects that provide only temporary time savings and only for those traveling in cars. This increase in impervious surface leads to more flooding and catastrophic cost overruns at NCDOT. NCDOT currently spends almost 75% of its budget on new construction and maintenance. This is not sustainable or good practice. Also, meanwhile, roadway fatalities have continued to rise, especially with those traveling outside of cars. And the planet, as we know, is heating up. It's obvious that our approach to transportation must change. Setting a goal to lower VMTs while simultaneously widening roads to accommodate more vehicles is a blatant recipe for failure. We all look for you to move us in the right direction, and I really appreciate all the work that everyone on this committee is doing to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final speaker, Chad Jones.
Yes, hi, thanks. I just want to second Dwight Otwell's comments and Tina Govan's comments as well about transitioning away from cars and to consider the cost of cars. You know, I urge the decision makers present here to consider the costs of continuing to prioritize cars over people and driving over walking and biking. There are significant social, environmental, and economic costs to driving. You know, free parking isn't free. Biking is more efficient, it's healthier, it's cheaper than driving, it's more equitable. It benefits local businesses, bikers shop more. It also benefits drivers. The more people that are biking and walking, the better the existing roadways will be, if there's less cars on the road. But if we want more people to bike and walk, we need significant improvements in the infrastructure to do so. We need protected bike lanes on the roads, on direct road routes. We need connected networks of these protected facilities so that we can have the opportunity to make this transition. So thank you again, and I appreciate all of your work.
Thank you, everyone, for the excellent comments. Really appreciate them. I know on behalf of all of the DCHC and Campo members, we are listening, we hear you, we appreciate everything that has been shared. I also appreciate people limiting their comments, and that we recognize that not everybody was able to sign up to speak. You are welcome to submit written comments to either organization that can be shared out with all of the members, and then we also have a written comment that will be shared out. And if there are any additional ones, please send them in and they will be shared. Sig, I will now turn it back over to you. I just also want to mention that the bulk of our meeting, we were hoping to have for discussion amongst all of the board members, where we will reflect back on the comments that we have just heard today. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. And let me also share my thoughts around the thoughtful, respectful, and well-stated comments. If you can see the video right now, you would see the smile on my face as I've heard these comments, many of which are from my dear and good friends. So please know that what you are saying is important. You have been heard, and we so appreciate your comments as an advocate of the things that you're talking about today. I also, as Wendy said, want to encourage those who did not have a chance to talk because of our time to submit your comments in writing, because we take these comments extremely serious. And as Wendy said, we want to move through our agenda to get the content from our professionals out, and then leave as much time as we can to hear from our members, because obviously what our members think is also important. So we're going to move quickly through the agenda to get through the comment period and discussion, starting with a census snapshot. John Hodges-Koppel.
Thank you, Chair Hutchinson. If you could go to the next slide, Alex. Thank you. So just 3 slides. Later on, we're going to talk about the land use that is one of the foundations for the transportation plan, but that looks forward. So thought it might be a little helpful to look at the recently released census data to show how the triangle in the context of the state has changed over the last 10 years. So the state as a whole, North Carolina grew by 900,000 people. 37% of that growth was in 3 triangle counties, Wake, Durham, and Johnston. And then broadening out, 77% of that growth was in just 8 counties, all in our big 3 metro regions. So Charlotte, Triad, and Triangle. Next slide, please. Diving down into the municipal level, there are 18 cities and towns in North Carolina that added 10,000 or more people over the last decade. And half of them, 9 of them, are in the triangle. And those 9 had a combined growth of 250,000 people. And as a result, 7 of the 25 largest cities in North Carolina are in the triangle, each with over 40,000 residents. And probably sometime next year, Apex will pass Chapel Hill to become the 4th largest municipality in the triangle. Next slide, please. So let me now turn it over back to Chair Hutchinson to introduce Ryan Brumfield. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And we always appreciate our friends from NCDOT being here. Ryan is with the Integrated Mobility Division of NCDOT, and he's going to be talking about the Integrated Mobility Division strategic initiatives. Welcome, Ryan. Ryan, if you may be on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you this morning. So I'd like to share a few updates from the Integrated Mobility Division, some recent initiatives that we've been working on, a lot of which I think get to the comments that were made this morning by all the participants in the meeting. So next slide, please. As mentioned in the comments, and as we all know, the landscape of mobility is evolving. There's a growing expectation from the public for us to provide better multimodal transportation options and to embrace new technologies and initiatives and innovations. Next slide, please. So recognizing the evolving landscape of mobility, in 2019, we merged the public transportation and bike and ped divisions, really with the core goal being to ensure we're working toward common strategies across the modes and to position ourselves to react to these emerging mobility needs and technologies. We also merged to better integrate and regionalize multimodal transportation concepts throughout the state and to strengthen partnerships between planning organizations, our division offices, our division, and public transportation agencies. Next slide. Here's our organizational structure in the division. We have 3 core teams. We have a particular focus on planning and programming. We're building out our team here, but we hope that we'll be more integrated and involved in the planning process throughout the state to ensure multimodal transportation is considered throughout the process. We also have a new focus on innovations and data, which will be some of the topics I cover in the remaining slides. But I want to make sure that we're looking towards the future, understanding new technologies and innovations and emerging mobility trends, and planning our activities around those goals. Next slide. Our core mission is to provide leadership for safe, affordable, and innovative multimodal transportation throughout the state, and our core goals are to increase access. We want to eliminate transportation barriers and ensure all North Carolinians have equal access to opportunities and services, enhance quality of life by providing choices and multimodal options for residents, and then regardless of the mode that individuals take, we want to ensure they're safe getting to their destination. Next slide. In North Carolina, we estimate that approximately 1 million people in the state either do not own a vehicle, are not able to drive, or potentially are in an economic situation that makes their vehicle unusable at times due to maintenance issues. So this map shows 1 dot equals 20 individuals in the state that are in that category of not having a vehicle. In North Carolina, communities of color are nearly 3 times more likely to live in a household without a car. Over 60% of transit riders are people of color compared to about 30% of the population. Average commute times to work by transit is 45 minutes compared to 24 minutes by car. So clearly there's a disparity, and there's certain groups that are more affected by this disparity than others. We want to make sure that the transportation system provides equal access to all residents. Next slide. We also want to enhance quality of life by increasing access and improving multimodal choices. In a survey of North Carolinians, 70% said they would walk or bike more if they had a safe bicycle and pedestrian network. So people obviously want choices and options, and many people need these options to have basic access. And just obviously also want to mention to some of the earlier points, the importance of a multimodal network to ensure we're addressing climate change and preparing for a future where we're mindful of the environmental challenges we have. Next slide. As we expand multimodal options, we concurrently have to make the network safer for pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit riders. We regularly rank in the top 10 nationally for pedestrian and bike fatalities. As you know, we're 9th in the country in population. Last year, I think we were 5th or 6th in pedestrian and bike fatalities. And there was increase last year with potentially related to the increase in recreational bike and pedestrian travel last year due to the pandemic. So we have to make sure we're addressing this challenge as well as we promote multimodal options and build a more multimodal network that we're ensuring those users are safely accommodated on the roadways. Next slide. So to successfully achieve these goals, we have to have a vision for what transportation looks like in a world where these goals are being met. If we achieve our goals, what does it look like? Envision a future transportation system in which technology makes all modes of transportation quicker, cheaper, and convenient, and safer. Multimodal options rival driving in terms of time, convenience, and cost. Everyone using the system is accommodated safely. Transportation planning and project development is closely connected to land use planning and economic development planning. And ultimately, our residents are happier, healthier, and more likely to participate and succeed in the economy. Next slide. On the technology and innovation side, we focused a lot in IMD recently on a common process of understanding emerging mobility trends, developing ideas, securing grant funding, piloting new concepts, and then disseminating lessons learned and best practices broadly. And you can see the icons here on the right of a few recent examples of this. We have projects in many parts of the state where we secured grant funding, partnered with local communities to pilot or demonstrate new technologies and innovations, and then take the lessons learned and best practices from that and spread the information broadly across the state. Next slide. One very unique example of this is Wilson's on-demand microtransit project. You've probably all heard of the concept of microtransit by now. If you have not, think of Uber or Lyft, but subsidized and provided as shared rides for the public. And in Wilson, this has been so widely successful that we kind of think this will be the future of public transportation across the state and really a game changer, we think, for public transit. In Wilson, ridership has nearly doubled during the pandemic compared to pre-pandemic levels on their previous service. Average wait times for transit in Wilson is only 15 minutes with the new service. The cost per trip to the city of Wilson is $11 compared to a statewide average of $22 for traditional demand response public transportation. And as you know, we are the second most rural state in the country. I recognize we have many urban areas as well, but we still are predominantly a rural state. And we think that microtransit offers the opportunity to ensure that every person, regardless of if they live in a high density area or not, would be served by a public transportation option that rivals driving. And when we can get to that point where we have public transit that is as convenient and cost effective as driving, we'll have many people switching modes, but also the people that we've left behind in the past that maybe were not using public transit now have a viable option to get to work and to services in their community. You can see on the right here a map of all the locations in the state that are considering microtransit, either starting service soon, planning service, or exploring this option for the community. Next slide. So really on transit technology, we have an outlook in IMD that eventually will have mobility as a service as a common model across the state where residents can plan, schedule, and pay for all transportation in one place. Again, with at the core of that, including truly on-demand transit, similar to what we're seeing in Wilson, where people can still live a spontaneous lifestyle but be able to use transit for their daily needs to get to work and other services. And all of it will be connected through a common application, again, making transit easy to use, effective, cost effective for residents, and as convenient as it would be to drive. One of the first major steps we're making to make this a reality is the RFP that we're putting out by the end of the year for the top technology vendors in the country. Hopefully they will respond to our RFP, and then we'll have all of our transit agencies in the state will be able to use that RFP to select vendors that can advance technology in their community. Next slide. We've also helped establish NCDOT as a leader in connected and autonomous vehicle technology by piloting CASI, an autonomous shuttle by EasyMile. We've now piloted the shuttle in 2 locations, most recently in partnership with the National Park Service at the Wright Brothers National Memorial in Kitty Hawk. It was the first AV shuttle deployment in a national park site, beating out Yellowstone by a couple of weeks. So we view this as obviously the future, autonomous vehicles. We want to make sure that we're putting equal attention on autonomous shuttles so we have autonomous transit in the future, not just on autonomous personal vehicles. Next slide, please. We're also planning and implementing a robust multimodal network that accommodates all users through implementation of our Complete Streets policy, including a process of continually updating our guidance and approaches to implementation to ensure that this Complete Streets policy is implemented appropriately across the state. We also have a key role in bike and ped planning throughout the state through our local bike ped planning grants, which we've completed over 200 of, and statewide plans like the Great Trail State Plan, which you see a snapshot of on the right here. The map includes a map of our core trail network in the state through the Great Trail State Plan. Next slide. Finally, we're working to help better link land use and transportation planning. A specific example of this is the work on the S-Line TOD project that many of you are familiar with. We're working with communities along the S-Line between Sanford and Warren County to develop a shared vision for the S-Line corridor, determine station locations, then locally for each community develop land use plans, zoning recommendations, and infrastructure investment recommendations to maximize the benefits of the S-Line and ensure residents have equal access to get to those stations when the S-Line comes to fruition in the future. Next slide, please. Obviously, key to achieving these goals in the future is to build strong partnerships. To expand our reach and impact with these activities, we're building a team that will participate in the planning process and build these coalitions throughout the state. Our team's responsibilities are split into 4 key regions, and our planning team is still being developed in many of these areas, but we are fully staffed. We do anticipate more collaboration across the state, working closely with planning bodies, local governments, and NCDOT division offices. Next slide. And with my last couple slides, just wanted to cover funding. Obviously, to make a lot of these goals that we discussed today a reality, funding is critical. So first off, central to going forward, achieving these goals is to think about a complete streets policy. We anticipate expanded incorporation because of this policy of multimodal components within existing highway projects, within existing highway project budgets, and in cases when we've identified multimodal needs on those projects. I&D, personally, we administer over $100 million per year in state and federal funding, mostly on the transit side. We have a role to play in ensuring these funds are distributed in an equitable manner and in a way that will maximize return on investment. So we have some work to do to make sure we've maximized the value of those funds. We also want to enhance and streamline underutilized or underperforming transit and active transportation programs like the Transportation Demand Management Program, which we think we can do better in how we administer that. Our state concept funding that focuses on coordinated regional transit services, which has been underutilized since that funding was made available. And the TAP program through FHWA that often funds bicycle and pedestrian projects. We have the ability in front of us, I think, to improve how that program is administered. Also, if the higher funding levels in the infrastructure bill are passed, and you're probably keeping up with that debate and how contentious and evolving that is right now. But if the bill were to pass, there's substantial increases in funding. We have to be ready to pivot and make sure we can spend that funding effectively if we have increased funding levels. And historically on the transit side, a lot of our rural transit providers have limited capacity to expand or improve service. They have kind of an operations background. So we do have some work to do, again, to position ourselves to be able to spend additional resources when those are available quickly to show that we have a need to expand service and improve service. And And also all indications in the new bill and other indicators are that discretionary grant opportunities will increase in the future. You're familiar with some of the key programs like RAISE and Infra. We anticipate those increasing. So we have to be ready to proactively pursue those opportunities and give ourselves the best chance to win additional funding beyond the formula funding that's out there. Next slide. So just to reiterate this point on the transit side, you can see an infrastructure bill, a comparison of the different grants. And we anticipate if the bill were to pass, about $1 billion in additional discretionary funding for transit would be available. So again, the need to be ready for that and have projects and ideas identified so that we can compete for that is very important. And next slide. And then finally on the more broad multimodal programs, we anticipate infra, if the bill passed, would increase substantially, and probably most importantly, RAISE, the RAISE program, which has broader eligibility, would increase substantially in the new budget. And then there would be new programs created, a lot of which have focused on climate resiliency, environmental stewardship, multimodal transportation, equity. New programs created or increased funding levels in programs that address those goals. So very important that we're thinking of how we're ready to pursue those opportunities and developing projects early, proactively to go after those opportunities. So with that, I know that was a lot. Hopefully I was brief enough, but that's all I have to share with you this morning. Just want to close by saying thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you. I look forward to building partnerships and working together with each of you in the future. And if you have questions now or want to follow up afterwards, I'd be happy to speak with any of you.
Ron, we're going to hold questions until we finish the presentations, but we so appreciate your comments. It was just spot on. And particularly in light of the public comments that we received today, this is exactly the direction we want to be heading. And let me just also mention that the Integrated Mobility Division is being led under the leadership of Julie White, who had another engagement today. So she brought Ryan as a talented professional to put this information before us. So please give our best to Julie and continue the great work. All right, members, is just check in and staff. What we would like to do is a time check is to try to finish the presentations by 10:30 if possible, so we can have enough time for our members to be able to engage in comments and questions. That said, we're going to move on to the next item, which is the Connection 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, starting with the Joint MPO Transportation Policy Priorities. And Aaron Kane. Aaron?
Thank you, Chair Hutchinson. Next slide, please. Okay. Bonnie, should I get this? I believe this is your slide. I think maybe turn it over to you.
Go ahead and skip that slide, please.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so I just wanted to provide a brief reminder for everyone on the boards that you do have joint policies that you have adopted. Policy priorities, there are 7 of them. Next slide, please. And they were included as an attachment to the agenda packet. And staff from both MPOs has gone through and gone into more detail on 3 of them, you may recall. Those are the ones shown here in bold: invest for success, make NC a leader in active transportation investments, and strengthen support for demand management and technology. And what I want to do just to set the stage for your discussion is go through each of those and highlight some of the things that we've put in the preferred MTP scenarios that address each of these policy priorities. Next slide, please. So the first one, invest for success, which basically means identifying funding needs and opportunities to meet our growing and diversifying transportation needs. In the MTP, this is addressed by projecting a fair share of future NC First Commission recommended funding, and that all counties within the region, not just Orange, Durham, and Wake, will have dedicated funding from a dedicated sales tax funding to use for projects that meet our most pressing needs at the local level. Next slide, please. Another one was to make NC a leader in active transportation investments, and being a leader includes investing in major transportation projects that are non-highway, that are non-motorized. So in this case, that means making sure we are follow through on the study we're doing for the Triangle Bikeway and work together as a region to see that project through to its construction. Working on opportunity places. This is where we are creating more mixed use, walkable, denser areas throughout the region and creating those through our local land use policies, and then increasing funding for these active transportation investments, specifically through the NC First Commission funding and additional local revenues. Next slide, please. And then finally, strengthening support for demand management technology. And this is really continuing and expanding programs that we already have, such as TDM, Transportation Demand Management, Intelligent Transportation Services Systems, ITS, and utilizing Transit Signal Priority, or TSP, along key transit routes. With that, I will turn it over to Bonnie to discuss the engagement results that were done through the last MTP engagement period.
Thanks, Aaron. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Just wanted to hop through the community engagement in this last round, but as a quick reminder, for the 2050 MTP development, we have tried to engage the community at several different phases. And that is beginning to wind down in our final, as we get to the draft plan and the final adoption period. But our heaviest engagement occurred almost just about a year ago now, when we established the MTP goals and objectives. And we currently just completed the engagement for the scenarios, the alternative scenarios that were presented to the community. We asked them for feedback through an online survey and through a few additional meetings to go with that. So today I'm just going to share, Alex, could you go to the next slide, please? Quick information about the results. This slide just demonstrates that we did get feedback across the region. Alex, go ahead to the next slide. Just want to let you all know that the presentation is online, and we can go further into these results at your individual meetings if you'd like to. Most of this information has already been shared with you. But putting it together in the context for today's meeting, one of the major questions in the scenario survey was asking all of the respondents to rank some of the key measures that we were going to use to evaluate scenarios against each other. Just wanted to share this with you. At the bottom in the reddish brown is all respondents. Top left is Campo, and the items that are at the very top were of highest ranking, obviously, and the items at the bottom were the ones that fell to the lowest. And on the right in the green is DCHC. So there actually is not a lot of fluctuation among all of our survey respondents, but did want to share with you that the top three priorities tended to be pretty consistent. Next slide, please. Actually, Alex, go back one slide. I apologize. We do have a few folks who cannot see this. So top three priorities that I was just mentioning are the creating passenger rail service, reducing congestion on roadways, but also increasing facilities for bicycles and pedestrians. For DCHC, one of the things that was unique was that reducing greenhouse gas emissions and air pollutants was a little bit higher, and it shook out pretty much the same way for when we put all of the results together. Okay, Alex, go ahead. Then the other main question about with the scenarios was about funding. We asked participants how supportive they are of, or how much they agree with statements that additional funding is needed on the state or local level for the three different major modes that we're looking at in the MTP, meaning roadways, transit, and then bicycle and pedestrian improvements. And so looking at all respondents for this one, we do have it sliced up again in other presentations, but for today, we just wanted you to see that when we put everybody together, your top line is state, what folks think about state funding with regard to roadways. And then your second line, if you can see Alex's pointer here, is for local, whether or not respondents agree that additional funding should be provided on the local level for roadways. So your third or your second set there in the middle relates to transit and the support for funding for transit on the state and local level. And then finally, bike ped is your bottom two bars. One thing I'll note, you can see this, is that the majority of folks, meaning over 50% in every category, do support additional funding for either on an agree or strongly agree level for additional transportation funding across these three modes. You'll see a little bit of deviation, as you can, where with regard to support for additional funding with roadways, and then versus transit versus bike ped projects. And there's some deviation with regard to whether or not folks think it should be funded on a more local or state level. Next slide, please, Alex. We had over 1,000 comments just for this second survey. Again, lots of folks pointing out specific projects. I'm not sure that the results would surprise many of you, but bike ped, transit support in general, but specifically protected bike lanes, specific support for CRT or projects, all of those things came out in the comments as well. Go ahead, Alex, next slide. Just last note on public engagement. It's not done for the MTP in a vacuum, and we always want to remind anyone when we're looking at community engagement for the MTP that we are actually also sucking up pieces and large parts of other planning processes, like the local comprehensive plans, transportation plans, transit plans, special studies, and corridor studies that we do. And those all also have community engagement. I was going to talk a little about commuter rail. I'm going to go ahead and skip that. I think most of you have seen it anyway. Next slide, Alex. And I was going to talk, just as a reminder, as an example of the Wake Transit Plan, but we'll skip that one as well. Go ahead, Alex, and I think that's it for me. Over to you, John.
Thanks. So the final two things one I would just remind folks of before we talk about shared regional investments are two of the big drivers in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. One being land use, and many speakers today have referenced that, and the other being the revenues available to invest. Next slide, please. So you've seen versions of this before. During the alternatives, we had sort of 4 different alternatives shown there in green boxes that we looked at and analyzed. And we are now preparing a preferred scenario, which is sort of jumping off from the altogether scenario. So it's not going to be exactly the same, but that's going to be the basis. So next slide, please. And the first thing we do is we look at the forecasted amount of growth. And that, of course, is built on that 2020 census results that we just had. So the current amount of population and jobs are kind of shown by those gray bars. And then the red and green bars on top of those are the added population and added jobs we expect over the next 30 years, that 2020 to 2050 period. So that's adding 1.1 to 1.2 million people and another 840,000 jobs. And you can kind of see it's, I've got quotes around DCHC and Campo because it's actually a little bit beyond their boundaries, but that's where the growth would be forecast to go. Next slide, please. And so for the land use forecasts that we're using for the preferred scenario, there are 4 changes from what we called the community plans, right? The land use that is based on the already adopted local plans. And those 4 changes relate to more development on anchor institution campuses. That'll add about 5,000 jobs at the 4 universities. We asserted multifamily affordable housing on publicly controlled sites that met physical criteria. So it was a mechanically derived assertion, and that adds 10,000 units of legally binding affordable housing over the next 30 years. We then increased the capacity for growth at 22 activity hubs. I'll show those in a second. And we also increased the capacity for growth along frequent transit lines. So those are the 4 changes. Next slide, please. Now, these maps are going to be a little too small to really see, but these are online. They're zoomable, so folks can kind of see which parcels were touched. So the ones in green are at those anchor institutions, and you can see on the slide there how many housing units and how many jobs are added at each location based on that increase. And you can't see on the map, but they're there, and you can zoom in and see them. Those blue dots are those affordable multi-family housing locations. So over 30 years, that'd be another 5,000 units in Wake, 3,500 in Durham, 1,000 in Orange, and 500 in Johnston. Next slide, please. These mobility hubs, about 24 places around the region. This is based on, for Campo folks, you'll remember your commuting corridors study. So that's where the Campo area hubs came from. And then we applied that same technique and worked with local planners to extend that same approach over on the DCHC side. And although we don't have final results, if the initial scenarios that we looked at are any indication, it might be about 5% of those future allocated jobs that would land in these hubs. Next slide, please. And then finally, all these red areas are parcels that would be along frequent transit lines that are in the draft preferred scenarios. And where there were parcels that weren't already developed and weren't already identified as mixed use transit oriented, we changed the capacity for growth on those parcels to allow for that. And then whether growth actually gets assigned there is through the tool that we use. But again, looking at prior scenarios, we might expect roughly 20,000 added jobs or 30,000 added households to land in those red locations. Next slide, please. So that's just the composite map. So you can see which parcels were touched by these estimates. And of course, anything that's not colored is the same between the community plans and the opportunity places land use. Next slide, please. So then the final kind of driver or piece to this is the revenues that are available. And they're really in 3 buckets. One bucket is the traditional revenues, the things that are happening right now under current rules. So state and federal funds that show up in the Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP, and allocated through the current STI framework. We also continue the current county level transit sales taxes and vehicle fees. And then we use the past pattern for other sources. So whether it's local street bonds, whether it's developer funded projects, we kind of have an other category that captures that. Then we add 2 new revenue sources for this scenario. And in both cases, we apply those revenue sources only in the latter 2 decades, right? We assume it'll take a while to get these things in place, hopefully sooner than that, but for the purposes of fiscal constraint, we assume they only apply starting in the year 2031. So these next 10 years do not assume these revenues. The first of these is based on the NC First Commission, so a state commission that recommended additional revenues, and we've simply applied an MPO fair share based on population. And then the second is these additional local or regional revenues that would be on top of the current transit sales taxes that are available in 3 of the counties. And although this may not be a sales tax, we've kind of costed it as a sales tax equivalent, just so folks can kind of get a feel for what that might be. Next slide, please. And so this is how it works out. Campo on the top there and sort of the reddish brown, DCHC MPO in the green. It's probably too hard to see perhaps on your screen, but the big buckets then. One bucket that we kind of often overlook is the maintenance and operation costs that come from these revenue sources. So that's typically referred to as the highway fund. So that's a very large part of where the revenues go. We then have that second, kind of the longest bar in each MPO. That's those general state and federal capital dollars, things that go through the STI process. And then the third bar is what's generated both by the local and regional transit revenues and any assumed federal leverage that comes from those. So think of those BRT lines, bus rapid transit lines, the commuter rail project that's being studied. Both of those are dependent on federal matching funds, and so those show up as leverage on those sources. And then in the yellow boxes are these two new revenue sources that I talked about, the NC First Commission revenues and an additional local regional revenue. And the assumption on both of these, as the MPOs apply these to projects, is that these new revenues would be flexible. So they can be, obviously the new local regional revenue would be, can apply to projects that do not score well in the current statewide process. And we would assume that new state revenues do not have to be run through the current STI process. So we've got flexibility. Next slide, please. So let me now turn it over to Chris to talk about shared regional investments.
Thanks, John. In an effort to give you all the maximum amount of time to have your discussion, I'm going to try and keep this section. I'm going to try and cut the presentation time in half. So 3 areas. I want to talk to you about some of the shared regional investments in terms of transit, in the health, safety, and resiliency of mobility types of projects, and then a couple of corridors. Next slide, please. So the first, our future regional transit center. This is a Go Triangle sponsored project looking for a new transit hub for regional transit service, MicroTransit, and several fixed guideway projects that are being planned right now. This would connect to the bus rapid transit service that, from the Campo perspective, we look at as the Western Corridor, as well as the commuter rail project that's under study right now, and potentials for a connection to the Triangle Bikeway as that moves forward. It would also be critical, I think, to last mile connectivity within RTP and provide a better access point to the highway network for transit, in particular fixed route services, those regional fixed route services. Next slide, please. The commuter rail project. Many of you are familiar with this project. Again, it's being sponsored by Go Triangle, and they're leading us through this process. Currently looking at Durham to Wake and possibly into Johnston County corridor stop locations, and the schedule of what the service might actually look like is currently being studied. Ridership and rail capacity modeling are underway. You can see on the bottom there sort of where it's at in its process, but this project, as it moves forward, ultimately I think would really be that sort of show centerpiece joint project, probably even bigger and maybe even more important to the future of our region than say I-40. Next slide, please. Bus rapid transit, within the Wake transit efforts that are going on, there are several bus rapid transit corridors moving forward at various stages of project development. In addition to those, we are currently studying the extension of bus rapid transit along the Western corridor and what we call the Southern corridor, which would connect from the Western corridor would connect from downtown Raleigh or downtown Cary to RTP, and the Southern corridor from Garner out to Clayton. It would help ensure a diverse travel market is served by appropriate transit service, and could absolutely provide that first last mile solution that we are going to be looking for with it to help support the commuter rail corridor. Next slide, please. Just a better look at these, you can kind of see the study areas that are under study right now. Exact alignments for these extensions are under study and yet to come into the future. Next slide. The Triangle Bikeway joint study that's been underway for over a year now. You can see, go back one slide for me. You can see sort of the preferred alignment that has been identified and would connect Chapel Hill, RTP, and the communities in Wake County all the way into Raleigh, connecting into existing bicycle and pedestrian networks. This would largely be within the I-40 corridor. You can see a little deviation in a few places, but also I think a game changer when it comes to regional multimodal connectivity. Go ahead to the next slide and get a quick snapshot of sort of what that typical section of the Triangle Bikeway might look like, with dedicated bicycle portions and also an area reserved more for pedestrians or slower moving traffic. Next slide, please. The TDM program, Aaron touched on this a little bit, but just I think it's worth noting over and over again, this is a really important joint project. It's critical to transportation management strategies in the region, in the state, and I think ultimately nationally. And one of the challenges we have with this, I think, is securing long-term commitments from our partners at the state to ensure future success of this program. Currently, it's really done on a year-to-year basis, and I think that's one real policy push that you all may want to consider moving forward, is how to work with NCDOT to ensure that this becomes more of a long-term program and a multi-year program rather than a year-to-year renewal of a project. Next project, please, or next slide, please. A couple of corridors to note here: the US 70 corridor, Glenwood Avenue. We have several current projects in the TIP and the STIP that are funded and going through project development. I think with these projects, the devil's going to be in the details, ensuring that as they move through project development, that we are getting the corridor that we want as a region. That means making sure we have things like the ability to have transit signal priority, or adding this to the BOSS system with full depth pavement shoulders, things like that. Making sure that the interregional bicycle and pedestrian connections that have already been planned long range in this corridor are part of the project where they're appropriate, and in the sections that'll be more freeway-like, looking at incorporation into the future managed freeways network that is being planned as well. And of course, making sure we have access to support the future land use priorities within this corridor is going to be important. Next slide. I think the last project here is the managed roadways, managed motorways. You may have heard it referred to as managed motorways or managed freeways. This is really a technology-based system within our freeways that is designed to help better manage the mobility in those corridors. I think it also is going to be key to ensuring that we have things like our BOSS network, making sure that it can be as successful as possible. Next slide, please. There's a couple of projects here that are programmed. You can kind of see the network here that's already funded, really principally through 2 TIP projects. They were delayed a few years ago, like many of our projects in the region, for their funding, but they remain under project development, and we're hoping that perhaps these can be accelerated a little bit in the future. Next slide. And probably the key one here right now is the I-6006 project, which really does cross the border between the 2 MPOs and is in the I-40 corridor. You can kind of see the extent of what they're studying right now, and this would likely continue to be that first project that moves forward. But also ensuring that, as it might be appropriate, a lot of the key BOSS sections of the BOSS network are within this corridor. So we'll want to make sure that this is planned for as well. Next slide. And I think that's it for me.
Thanks, Chris. So this is just kind of a summary slide of where we stand. Draft preferred scenarios being developed by each MPO. There'll then be the public engagement on the scenario. And of course, adoption of the projects by decade is the fiscal constraint in the final plan. Final plan has to go through air quality conformity, and then we prepare the final report and supporting material. So that's where we're headed. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it back, I think, to the chair. It looks like we have about 25 minutes left, and so I think there's options that the chair might want to consider. One is to just kind of throw it open for discussion. I mean, that's the whole purpose of these meetings, is to have the board members talk to one another. We did also prepare some poll questions, I think 3 of them, which we could do, but we could skip. So I'll kind of let the chairs decide how they'd like to use the time to engage the board members.
Well, thank you, John. I'm going to jump in, and excellent presentations from everybody. Really, we're so fortunate to have such phenomenal staff and so many important things that are happening right now between our 2 MPOs. I'm going to just jump ahead since we don't have a lot of time and say that I think we'll skip the poll because we really know some people have hard stops at 11. And it's important that we give people a chance to talk about next steps, especially in light of the public comments that we've heard. So I'm just going to first open it up quickly for any clarifying questions, really just clarifying. And again, ask folks to please just be very concise in your comments related to any of the presentations we heard from staff. It is kind of hard to see who might have a comment. So maybe folks will just need to, jump in, I guess. But let's just.
Yeah, Wendy, let me just offer, if people could raise their hands.
Okay.
We can do that. And also, if someone has a general question, I'm suggesting that we maybe go 10 minutes over since we started late. Wendy, if that's acceptable with you.
Yeah, that's great. And
Okay.
we know some people have to leave at 11. So, you can put in the chat if you have a hard stop at 11. Okay, I see Will's
hand raised.
I see Will. Go ahead, Will.
Thank you, Wendy. Nice to talk to you again, by the way. I was very pleased with the comments. I thought they were all excellent, and they nicely summed up a lot of my feelings. And when you look at the comments that Bonnie showed us, the public comments, I believe that we've reached a tipping point in our community. If we haven't, we're very close to it. I think that people see the need to move away from a car-centric environment. And the existential question is, how do we do it? We saw a lot of ways and means that we are doing that incrementally, which are all good, and we're planning to do as well today. And I think they're great. But the question for me is, how can we do that? How can we accelerate that? When you look at places like Portland, Oregon, you see how less car dependent they are. I've forgotten what the percentage is, but it's a tremendous transit oriented and bike ped oriented mobility percentage. And then you look overseas at places like Holland, where they have tremendous quality of life, and they emphasize that quality of life in the cities over car dependency. How do we move in that direction? I believe that we have the will to do that now in our area, but it's not clear to me, I admit, how we do that faster. Please let me know if others share these feelings or if I'm alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. And I'm going to jump to Damon and opening up for board members also to respond to Will's challenge to us. How do we make this happen? Damon.
Thanks, Wendy. I think I appreciate Will's comments, and I think he highlights what for me is really important about the comments we heard from the public early in the meeting today, which was that sense of urgency. And this was that sense of urgency is something I think we were also trying to communicate to our own staff at the DCHC MPO during a recent meeting when we talked about the alternatives analysis for the 2050 MTP. As I think everyone here knows, as has been mentioned previously, we gave direction to the DCHC MPO staff in the wake of that conversation on the alternatives to really develop another alternative, at least one other alternative that actually reflects our policy priorities around climate change and other environmental impacts, racial equity, safety, and just general human health and well-being. And specifically, we asked the staff to create an alternative that, for example, in the first decade reflects the tip as it is now, and then in the out years being more visionary. And then perhaps in another alternative, treating the entire thing as a visionary plan. I know that staff's working hard on that. We got some good information today from the staff presentations. I really appreciate hearing those today, including the summary of the joint policy priorities that our two MPOs have adopted. We started working on drafting those joint policy priorities, I think back in 2018 with the help of John Hodges-Koppel. And those 3 that were highlighted out of the 7 total, I think, are really critical. And in particular, the emphasis on multimodal investments, the emphasis on active transportation, and in particular, the goal with that priority being to do better than our peers are doing in that realm. And to really focus our investments on bicycle and pedestrian projects. And then finally, of course, we heard some good comments from Chris Lugacina today on the importance of transportation demand management. What strikes me about this conversation is that, investing heavily in highway projects while underinvesting in transit and pedestrian and bike projects, which is what we are doing now and continuing to do, is not going to help us achieve our goals. But on top of that, I would say that increasing funding for transit and increasing funding for ped and bike projects while continuing to heavily invest in highway projects will also not help us achieve our goals. And in fact, I think undermines any increase in funding investment that we make in pedestrian and bicycle projects. So I think this is a challenge really for all of us in this room. And I mean, local governments doing better land use planning at our local community levels, our MPOs being clear about our priorities and making sure that those priorities are clearly reflected in our adopted plans. It means working a little bit more deliberately with our NCDOT partners. I was excited to see some of the work that Ryan presented from the Integrated Mobility Division earlier today. I would like to see that work actually reflected in the conversations we're having with NCDOT, both in our local level, in our divisions, and at the MPO level. And then finally, and perhaps even ultimately most importantly, is talking and advocating with our legislators and other policymakers about the funding available and the funding model for how we allocate, how we do our investments in regional and local transportation plans. I'm looking forward to seeing what our staff comes up with. I think if we could bring some renewed focus to those joint policy priorities that we've both adopted, that would be helpful in making sure that those are truly reflected in long-term planning. And also finally, just making sure we're using the right metrics. Are we actually looking at how our plan will impact our goals around greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental impacts? Are we actually looking at vehicle miles traveled and making reductions there? Are we looking at safety, including injuries and fatalities, and general health and well-being? I guess I would urge everyone here to be thinking about how our MTP can reflect these priorities more clearly, and embracing the sense of urgency that we've heard here today from public comments. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Damon. You gave us a great response to Will's challenge to us. Next, I see we've got Michael, and then Vivian, and then Sally Green. So Michael Parker.
Thank you. I don't want to belabor what, first I want to thank Will because he's stating it exactly right. I think, the time has come, and if we keep doing what we've always done, we'll keep getting what we've always gotten. I think it is time for some fundamental changes. And in that regard, a few points that I'd want to make. One is that I think we need to reverse our thinking in how we develop these plans. Typically, we look at a lot of variables, come up with a plan, and then see how it does or does not meet our goals. I think we have to start from the goals and configure plans that actually meet those goals, and then see if it fits within the fiscal constraints or not, and then make our case if we see that we have fiscal shortfalls, that we then have to use the planning process to advocate for those funds. Number one. Number two, sometimes we have to do addition by subtraction. I think to Damon's point, continuing the heavy investment in highways and roads is counterproductive to where we want to get. And so rather than just blithely accepting all the projects that are scheduled already, start thinking about seriously, do those projects advance our goals? And could the funds being allocated to those projects better meet our goals if they were invested elsewhere? I think another point that I would make is much of the planning, not all, but much of the planning that I see that particularly NCDOT does uses the car as the unit of discourse. We have to stop thinking about how do we move cars and start thinking about how we move people, and start using people and how quickly we move people from place to place as the goal, as a key metric of our planning, rather than how quickly we move cars from place to place. And then finally, just as a last point, what I would say, one of the things I think that the Integrated Mobility Division perhaps can think more deeply about is, while we talk a lot about the electrification of cars and ultimately buses and trucks, I think we need to give more attention to the electrification of bicycles. I think that particularly in areas such as Chapel Hill, where we have a very hilly topography, bicycles really enable us to get a much higher ROI, electric bicycles that is, help us get a much higher ROI on our bike investments. And so I think we really need to start thinking about what can we do in terms of bike shares or other means of getting electric bicycles into people's hands, because that really allows many folks who are not our hardcore bike users to participate both on a recreational and in a commutation basis in the bike infrastructure that we are or should be investing in. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Vivian Jones, then Sally Green, and then Marianne Baldwin.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. Will talking about moving away from a car-centric plan, but I think that we have to look at our plan as a living document. We're not doing that now. Once an item gets on the funding, it never changes. We only change the things that haven't been funded yet. Well, let me tell you something. Capitol Boulevard Freeway project has been funded for probably 10 years. It was planned 15 years ago, and it no longer meets the needs of the people. It doesn't address the needs for pedestrian and bikes and transit. And so we need to look at these things again and change them to meet the needs that we have today. Our world has changed in the last 15 years. And the Capitol Boulevard project, in my opinion, is totally not what we need right now. And so we need to look at these things and realize that it takes a long time to plan, takes a long time to get funded, and then we end up spending the money that we have to do something that really doesn't meet the needs of the people at that time. That's my comment.
Thank you, Vivian. Sally Green, and then Marianne, and then Pam Hemiger. Sally, are you having trouble?
Okay, good. Can you hear me?
Yes,
I'm not
we
used
can
to this
hear you.
format. Okay, I would like to at least briefly shift the focus to the connections between these transit plans and our land use planning. I think everybody in this meeting understands that those two things are related. I'm not so sure that our constituents really understand that, and sometimes not even sure that all of our colleagues understand that. I was really impressed with the map that showed the numbers of households without cars and how that correlated to where some of the major transit lines need to go. And my particular interest is in affordable housing and meeting the challenge of making sure that our land use plans concentrate investments in affordable housing and permission for all kinds of housing along major transit corridors. And I just pose this as a challenge and ask for anyone's comments and potential ideas for surmounting that challenge, because at least I know from the Orange County perspective, and this happened during the light rail conversation, we had a lot of folks who said, well, what about rural Orange County? We need mass transit too. And I certainly understand the perspective, but when we're looking at, realities and practicalities and sheer numbers, that can't be the solution. So to me, it's a conundrum, but it's something that we really need to start getting on top of if we're going to go forward with this kind of planning.
Thank you, Sally. Mary Ann?
Good morning, everyone. So I have a couple of, I have one question, then a couple of comments. First, when I was hearing all the information about the North Carolina First Commission recommendations, I thought, wow, this is great. And then I said, oh my God, what kind of feedback or reaction are we getting from the legislature? Can anyone answer that question for me?
Somebody from staff who can respond? Legislators' response.
Yeah, so this is John. I do not know the current status of those recommendations. I know there's continued meetings around them. Don't know if any of the MPO staff have been in those, or if Ryan is still on the call or not. He may have a better feel for where that's headed.
I mean, I agree with everything that was suggested, but I also know, having lived through the legislature's somewhat defunding and changing the funding model for light rail, kind of concerned about what they may or may not do. It's like, it's great to have these plans, we need them, but I think that we also have to be realistic, and we have to be talking to the NCGA and our legislators. The second comment I have is, I just want to say to Vivian, amen. You're absolutely right about Capitol Boulevard, and that's why the S line is going to be so critical. But also, my final comment, we really have to keep our eye on the ball. Commuter rail needs to be our #1 priority, along with bike ped improvements. And we need a success. We need it from a federal standpoint, so we will secure funding. If you talk to Congressman Price, will tell you that this has to happen for us to remain serious contenders for future federal funding. And so we need to keep our eye on the ball and make sure we're doing everything we can to move commuter rail forward. It's going to be critical to our region, to our future. And I'll tell you, I've had conversations with people who have said to me, I was never in favor of commuter rail. We have to do this. And that's at least a dozen people. And I'll tell you what prompted that, the Apple announcement. So I think if we can use that as that impetus for moving forward, let's take advantage of it and let's really focus on this. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Pam Heminger, and then Jen Weaver.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you for this meeting too. I think it's important for us to come together. I agree with a lot of the comments that have been said, and Chapel Hillians particularly really want to stress the bike ped and alternative modes of transportation. But I will tell you, we are a region. We're an incredible region. Families and people live all kinds of places and work all kinds of other different places. We've got to be able to facilitate that. And that is, I agree, with commuter rail, with transit, with bike ped. There is no way with the growth predictions here to keep building roads that are going to be able to deal with, they can't deal with what we have now with the population. So we've got to find alternative ways. And I agree with Vivian, technology's changed, needs have changed. The world has changed and we need to be proactive versus reactive. We can't wait 15 years for a project to come forward that we don't need anymore. We've got to concentrate on these plans that bring more people, more environmentally to the places they work and enjoy. And it's fascinating because we are a region, you'll have a family that lives in Durham and one person works in Chapel Hill and one person works in Raleigh, but the kids are going to school there. And that's a very unique situation as we are all not one jurisdiction. And that story is repeated over and over again all over our counties. There's people moving further out. And if we don't help find ways to get them with transit and bike ped and ways in, we're just going to have these clogged up arteries that then people aren't going to want to work here. Companies aren't going to want to come here. And a lot of people moving here to our region are coming from large cities where they are used to transit infrastructure and not driving the cars. So we need to take a broader look at who's coming, how fast that growth is going to happen, and how do we accommodate it in ways that don't cause more roads to be built? How do we do it better? So thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Jen Weaver.
Thank you for all the terrific comments that have already been made. And so I want to just say I am so on board with everything that has been said so far. And so I want to add a piece to what has already been said and talk a little bit about remembering the excellent comment that was made at the beginning of this meeting from the woman who grew up in Bunn. And speaking as the mayor of one of the communities that is we are very much bought into being a part of a region. But you know, when you zoom in on those maps that John was showing us, Hillsborough doesn't have a lot of clusters of those dots on any of those maps. But transforming how transportation is prioritized and funded so that it is vastly easier to populate our communities with bike ped infrastructure and with transit is essential for places like Hillsborough and other small towns where if we had a strong bike ped infrastructure within our town, especially, you know, with the electrification of bicycles like Michael was talking about, it would have a huge impact on our community. One of the things we always talk about here, I know other communities have similar issues, is that in Hillsborough, there's basically one way through town, north-south, and you've got to get over railroad tracks in the river. So there just aren't many options for changing the congestion up and down Churton Street through town. So really our primary way out of that is getting people out of cars, because those are people driving from north of town down to the major, down and east to the major job centers. So it's just so important for smaller communities like us as well, even as we dream of also being connected by commuter rail and as that project moves forward into the future. And then this also, I believe there's such potential to get back, you know, to Mayor Baldwin's point about having leverage with the legislature. You know, if the DCHC and Campo MPOs can really get on board with this, being home to some of the biggest job centers in this state, but also bring in some of our more rural communities, less connected communities, to see the importance for those communities as well, then that will really give us more leverage. So I hope we can find ways as elected officials to reach out across the state to other communities interested in seeing this transformation.
Thank you, Jen. I'm not seeing any other comments at this time. The time is now 10:58. I know some people have to drop off. I hope, as Sig said, we'd like to extend this at least 10 more minutes for those of you who can please stay on. Before we kind of wrap up, is there anyone else wanting to speak that I missed? Okay. Well, Sig and I are going to both try to quickly sum up and talk about some possible next steps. I do want to circle back to how we started the meeting and the public comments that we heard, and also the fact that we are here together on the verge of adopting our 2050 MTP plan. And just to make sure that we're recognizing the opportunity that we have right now as we each move forward with scenarios that we adopt and what we put into the plan. And we were challenged this morning from the fantastic comments that we heard. We all know everything that everybody said was spot on, and the moment that we are at in time here in the region and on our planet. And so I just want to reinforce that each of our MPOs, I think, really need to go back and look at what can we do at this moment in time to try to make sure that what we're doing is implementing the values and the priorities that we really have. And also, that is consistent with the policies that our joint MPOs have adopted, getting back to the 7 policies, the 3 that were highlighted today, and to make sure that we are doing everything possible. I took notes on some of the suggestions that were made about making sure that we are focusing on our land use planning. And that we make sure, again, that our priorities that we've adopted are clearly reflected in the plan, that we work closely with NCDOT, much more closely than we are now, that we are not just fooling ourselves by investing in, we're investing more in bike ped, but at the same time, we're still following the same model of expanding our roads or focusing on cars, that we're not going to create the reality that we want. That we need to work much more at the state level. We've heard that for many people we need a strategy around working with the legislature, reaching out to rural counties, making these connections. Also, let's see, we need to have a focus on, with NCDOT across the board, that we are moving people and not cars, focusing on electric bikes, not just electric cars. And this is an equity issue and a health issue. Great comment about we need to remember, we need to look at our plans as living documents, have a process in place where we are revisiting them. We are not rigid and thinking once they're there, that's the only way we can do it. Look how much our region has changed in the past 10 to 15 years. And that we've got to be able to look at those plans the same way. And we're a region. We've got to keep the regional focus. We're so blessed to have an incredible region where people do work and play in different places. And again, we have to change how transportation is funded. We're just not going to get to where we need to be without a change in that system. And so that means, again, we've heard from staff things that we have to do within each of our governments, but also looking at the state. And then lastly, that we've got to be aware of what we're doing with the federal level with something like commuter rail. We didn't have a win with the light rail. We've got to have a federal win if we want to be looked at with other funding opportunities from the federal government, understanding how the commuter rail project is linked in to all the other sources of federal funding as well. I hope I may have missed something, but I was trying to reflect back some of the great suggestions that Will started us out with. And I guess I'm going to pass it to SIG, but I think what I would ask of our Campo partners at this point is if you all, I know you adopted the all-together model, but if you would all consider going back and having further conversations with your staff on similar to what we're doing, which is really focusing on 2035 to 2050 and looking at that as being more visionary. What different data do we need? What different models do we need? Really trying to push the envelope that we just need to take this leadership at this moment. So I think that would be personally my ask is for Campo and DCHC MPO staff to work together on ways that we really can truly align the plans that we adopt, because it's going to be much stronger when we go back and talk to the legislature, DOT, and our other partners, if we truly are singing off the same page. So I'll stop there and turn over to you, Sig.
Thank you, Wendy. And I want to thank all of our good friends at DCHC and our guests who've been here to provide these just outstanding comments. Also want to thank the members of Campo and all of our staff who do amazing work to keep our transportation system moving. It's hard to be able to describe a transportation meeting as exciting, but that's exactly the way that I feel this meeting was today. Incredibly exciting. I feel this is a watershed moment that I've never seen such a collective agreement and understanding that we need to start thinking about things in a different way. And I think we clearly heard that from the community. We heard that from our staff. And I think that is our charge, as Wendy has so clearly stated. That's our charge, is how do we do things in a different way? I think that Mayor Hemminger's point about we are a region and we need to think as a region. One thing that we don't have that we need, this may be a shocker, but we do not have a regional transit plan. We have a Wake plan, a Durham plan, an Orange plan, but we do not have a regional plan. That's something that we desperately need, and we're going to be working on that in the next year. But this whole integration of land use and transportation that creates healthy communities, that's something that hasn't been mentioned today. One of the key components of why we want to do this work is to create healthier communities where people can have more money in their pocket. The environment can be cleaner, and people don't have to have one of those stinking automobiles or two automobiles. So we're collectively on the same page. Let me just mention some of the components that have been mentioned around that is the significance of a commuter rail system that is the spine of our whole transit system. But then we can then put our BRT connections to the commuter rail. But in addition to that commuter rail as the spine, it also creates huge opportunities for affordable housing. It kind of can release the pressure valve that we're currently under in terms of rising prices by activating all this land along this commuter rail corridor that could be used to build houses and then connect to a commuter rail system that can move people around the region. So also, I really want to give a shout out to those folks who are supporting the Triangle Bikeway. I think this is a game changer, not only for us and our ability to move around and Michael Parker's comments about electric bikes, but I think our good friends at RTP and companies like Apple and Fidelity, these companies want alternatives to be able to move around. And as Michael said, electric bikes, you can go 20, 25 miles an hour and probably beat the folks who are on the I-40 corridor in their cars home to be playing with your kids a little bit sooner. Also things around our greenway system, which is amazing and probably one of the best in the country, but we need to continue to improve and expand our greenway system, complete streets and bike ped connectivity. Love the comments about bike ped, particularly in the handouts that were mentioned. And then finally, let me just close by talking about micromobility. which is a new and rising trend. But as Vivian Jones, Mayor Jones, like to talk about, is transit as a service, where all of this is integrated, and on your smartphone you can basically put in where you want to go, and the system will be able to organize your trip so that you just seamlessly be able to move throughout the region. So let me just also say, staff, if you could post on the website all the presentations today, so everyone can be able to access those presentations, and also make sure that any comments that were made or anyone listening to this would like to make about today's comments, or that you heard, or anything that you'd like to say, please pass that on to us, and I'm going to ask staff to make sure that the members of Campo and DCHC get those comments. What an incredible day. What an incredible watershed moment. And like I said, I've never seen such a collective understanding of how we need to move forward from here. So I want to thank everyone for being part of this meeting. We are now at 11:10. And at this point, unless there's any thoughts or comments, I'm going to declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you so much. We appreciate everyone being with us today.